Welcome back, all you great apes. My name is River. My pronouns are they, them, their Royal Highness. And this is the Woodshed, where we take religious fundamentalists and their nonsense out for a good old-fashioned country whooping. We debunk their culture war propaganda and give you the tools to fight back. Today, however, there will be no whooping. This is just going to be a little fun, and it's a chance to talk about me. This is Braxton Hunter. He's an internet apologist with a YouTube channel, and his daddy owns an online Bible college thing. Anyhow, so a couple of years ago, he did this video where he asked 10 questions for atheists, and he got so much pushback on his first version that he had to do another one. And it's because his original questions were so disingenuous. I decided to go with the second version, even though a couple of these questions are a bit sketchy. But okay, I'm going to take my best shot at these questions just for giggles. And if you find any other questions for atheists out there that you'd like me to tackle, let me know in the comments. All right, let's get to it.
Question 1. If you have a deconversion story from any world religion, would you mind sharing that story? If you grew up in a non-religious household, what was it like to experience being around other people who were raised religious?
Well, that is a very long story, and I'm not going to tell it all here. But I will say a few things about it. I grew up in a small conservative and fundamentalist sect that met in people's houses. They didn't care for church buildings and other trappings of the religious world, so to speak. My dad was a former pastor, and he was well known and I guess somewhat respected in our community. When I was 11 or 12, I answered an altar call. I guess that's the term that most churches use. The preachers scared the crap out of me, basically. They said that we could die at any time, including in a fiery car crash on the way home from that meeting that very night. So we'd better make sure we're saved. And so I became what we called a professing Christian, and that began a long, dark journey with mental illness and pain that did not end until my late 30s. Most of my extended family is still in this cult today, though some, like my sibling, have joined other cults. Anyhow, I can tell you how my family came to leave the church. It's because they taught that divorce and remarriage were always wrong. They would take away people's speaking privileges if they got divorced or remarried. They would tell battered wives to stay with their abusive husbands or they'd go to hell. My parents were in the ministry and they got to know a lot of people and a lot of their stories. And they got to know people's struggles probably better than most of the lay folks in the church. And so much to their credit, they gradually changed their minds on this issue. Well, my dad was not one to be quiet about the things that he believed in. I guess I can give him that in some regards. And he started speaking up and more loudly about the matter. And eventually he was told to shut up or they would kick our whole family out of the church. So that's what happened. When I was 15, I found myself never having to go again. But that was not my deconversion. I had only quit believing that this one particular sect had the truth, but I still believed there was truth to the Bible and to Christianity. Several years later, I read The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine. Now, this is not the best or most thorough critique of Christianity, but it was enough at the time. I came away from it convinced that if there was any truth to religion or if there was a God out there somewhere, none of that was to be found in the Bible. I considered myself a deist after that, and I guess I was what you would call a seeker for most of my adult life. So I spent some years exploring different churches and even different religions altogether. I would talk about religion with anyone who wanted to talk with me, even people like that others would tell me were crazy, you know? And after a few hundred conversations with religious believers, who would all tell me different stories and different definitions of God, I was forced to the conclusion that everyone's full of crap And the only honest position that I could take was agnostic. And that's where I stayed for a long time. Even though I didn't actively believe in a God anymore, I still thought there was something out there. And thinking about that would give me panic attacks. So bad, even I went to the hospital once thinking I was having a heart attack. Because way down deep in my brain, that belief in hell was still there, and I was afraid I could go there. Well, that finally changed in 2015. That's when I read The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. Now, I know Dawkins is a problematic figure nowadays, but so are many other important authors, and so I'll just acknowledge right off the bat and still say that this book changed my life immensely for the better. And it was his chapter on childhood indoctrination that did it for me. See, when you're a kid, you have to assume that the adults around you know what they're doing and know what they're talking about. And when you grow up in a culture where all the adults seem to believe the same things, you just absorb those beliefs and make them your own. Little kids are not critical thinkers. And in fact, no human is a critical thinker unless they've been trained to do it. And that's when I realized that the only reason, and I mean the only reason, that I had ever believed in a God in the first place was essentially because I'd been brainwashed into it from the day that I was born. I never had a chance to test these claims for truth before accepting them as my own. I learned that the only reason religion perpetuates is because generation after generation of children are coerced into it. That's when I got the nausea that Jean Paul Sartre describes. It's what hits you when you realize for good, it hits you hard that there's no God. And then I went through one of the worst weeks of my life as I had to grapple with accepting this fact and accepting that a lot of my life behind me was just wasted on this bullshit. Well, that's when I finally decided to go to university and learn some science. My first neuroscience class put the final nail in God's coffin for me. I learned that imaginary monsters can live in your brain for real. God lives in your amygdala. That's the deep region of your brain that remembers pain and fear. That's a literal real thing when they talk about putting the fear of God in children, right? That's what happens. They plant this imaginary monster right down in the fear center of your brain. And when it activates, it triggers your adrenal system, your fight or flight response. For real. Well, I'm happy to report that today there are no more monsters in my brain, except for the very real ones I can see in the world around me. And all the monsters? Well, they're very human and very physical.
Question number 2. Is there anything that Christian apologists or philosophers bring that you actually do consider to be good evidence for God? And if not, how do you define evidence?
Well, the short answer is no. If I had seen what I considered to be good evidence, I might be more inclined to believe your claims. The basic definition here will suffice. Evidence is the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid. Well, all right. What is the proposition we are being asked to accept? The proposition is that the Yahweh character in these stories handed down from the ancient past on some old scrolls is actually a real thing that exists. What evidence is offered by Christians to support this proposition? The scrolls and some arguments. Well, I don't consider these scrolls to indicate the truth of the proposition any more than I consider Twilight novels to indicate the existence of sparkly vampires. I need more than that. I need something more than some old scrolls before I accept your claims. I can't say that I know what would be sufficient evidence, but I definitely need more than this. Well, let me ask you a question, Braxton. If it were not for these ancient scrolls, where would you personally, where would you get the idea there's a God called Yahweh? Where would that belief come from? Where would you get that information?
Straightforwardly, I'm a dog person. Here's my dog, Indiana. Dogs, cats, both, or neither?
Well, this one's quick and easy. I like dogs, I like cats, I like many other animals, though I don't have any pets of my own at this time.
Did Jesus exist as a single historical individual? And if so, how reasonable do you think it is for people to hold the position that Jesus did not exist?
Well, the only thing I could do here is offer my opinion based on information available to me, because we don't have conclusive proof either way as to whether there was a real person behind the legends in the Gospels. But one thing we do know and can say for certain is that the Gospels are legends. If there ever was a real man behind the stories, he certainly never magically healed anyone, certainly never violated the laws of physics, and he's very much still dead. So for me, at this point, I don't hold a strong position on the historicity of Jesus. I don't think it's reasonable to hold a strong position either way. And I think the only honest answer we can give is quien sabe.
Of your Christian friends and family members, which one would stand the best chance of convincing you or persuading you than the others? Even if you think none of them stand a chance, some stand more of a chance than others, right? Who would that be and why?
Oh, a softball question. Absolutely none of them, unless they could actually perform miracles. Most of them are either in the same cult that I came from, or other cults, or maybe more mainstream religions. But out of all of them that I can think of, I'm the only one with an education in the sciences. And most of them are kind of dull and uninteresting to talk to anyway. And that's the case for pretty much anyone who has a brain full of religion instead of knowledge. And besides that, I don't think they want anything to do with me on account I'm kind of a visibly queer person, and that's not allowed in any of their religions.
What's your favorite film or television series?
I really have not watched very many movies or TV shows in a long time. I don't have regular TV at home and mostly just watch YouTube and read nonfiction. I'll watch apologist channels for content, and I like chess streamers and some other random stuff, but that's about it.
Contingency arguments for God's existence can be framed in a number of ways, obviously, but pick one, and what's your favorite response to this sort of contingency argument? Or if you're really ambitious, what's your favorite response to contingency arguments in general?
Well, I don't find any arguments for the existence of a God to be even remotely compelling. And honestly, if I'd heard them growing up, I might have been an atheist even sooner. But they didn't really do apologetics in my church, and they didn't have formally educated clergy. And so I never heard these arguments until I really started digging into religion and trying to find out if there was any truth to it. But frankly, arguments are not a substitute for evidence. And no one would need these arguments if there were actually good evidence for a God. We don't need fancy arguments to convince ourselves of things for which we have evidence. I'm with Bertrand Russell on this. All the arguments for God basically depend on bad grammar. Contingency arguments basically go like this: you are a contingent being. Contingent meaning that you exist because of something else that existed. But you are not a necessary being, meaning that it is possible that you might have not existed. So far, so good? Yeah, I know this is a little bit. Okay, now trace back that causality for all the generations back into the past, and eventually we're back at the origin of the universe itself. Is the universe necessary, or is it contingent? Well, says this argument, it's possible that the universe might not have existed at all, because we can imagine this possibility, I guess, and therefore it must be contingent. I don't know how anyone could honestly claim to know such a thing, but we're playing make believe here anyhow, so what the heck? Let's keep going. Well, what is this universe contingent upon? Well, it must have been made by a creator. Well, what's that creator contingent upon? Something must have made it, and something must have made that. Well, now we see we have a problem of infinite regress, right? Where does the buck stop? Well, it stops when they claim that God is not contingent upon anything at all, but has been eternally self existing forever into the infinite past and was not caused by anything. And therefore, God is necessary, meaning that he cannot not exist. So, yeah, to simplify, this argument is attempting to demonstrate that there must be like a first uncaused cause somewhere back in the causal chain. And because we can imagine such a thing to exist, therefore it must exist. Well, that's a problem for me. You can postulate this thing all you want, but all you're really doing is making up an explanation to stick in a place where we don't have an explanation yet. We've got these questions we can ask about the universe, but since no one has any real answers for them yet, we're just kind of stuck. Maybe there's an answer and maybe there's not, but you don't have it.
On your understanding of Christianity, what does it take for a person to become a Christian and experience everlasting life?
Well, in the church that I grew up in, salvation was contingent on our belief that our church was the only true church and you had to stay in it for your whole life and go to all the meetings and follow all the rules about how to dress and how to wear your hair and never get divorced and never question the teachings of the church and all that. Now, on the far end of the spectrum from that, there are those who say that, well, salvation is this free gift to anyone who believes in it, lives a good life. And there are many other opinions in between, none of which, of course, can be solidly proved. And there are even Calvinists who say that your salvation is predetermined and you don't even have a choice in it. At the end of the day, what we have is a whole lot of opinions and no verifiable facts. As far as I'm concerned, I treat anyone who identifies as a Christian as such because I have no accurate metric for that. Every Christian I meet tells me, well, we're the real Christians and the others, those are fake Christians. Well, when I ask how I can tell them apart, it's always on the basis of whether they're behaving like a decent human being. And so I don't see how the religious label tells me anything. I have a much easier time determining if someone is a good human rather than a real Christian. Well, as far as an afterlife, I don't believe there's any such thing personally. But what I do know is this: no human has ever been there and come back to tell us about it. And so anything a human tells me about it is guaranteed to be bullshit. I can believe whatever I want about it. If I want to believe in the afterlife of Socrates, where you sit around having beers with the old philosophers, hey, great. I can believe that. Nobody can disprove it. It's totally unfalsifiable.
Whether you think anything in the Bible is true or not, do you think that the Bible or any passage in the Bible seems to teach eternal conscious suffering in hell? Maybe you think it teaches universal ultimate salvation or annihilation, the idea that people will no longer be conscious but will be annihilated and no longer have a conscious experience of anything.
All right, so I'll say four things about this. One, there's scholarship out there that suggests that hell is a teaching that doesn't even actually come from the Bible. It came from Dante or somewhere else, Catholic Church maybe. Obviously, I think that's all nonsense. And two, I would consider infinite punishment to be the very opposite of justice. And any god who would torture someone forever for the terrible crime of not believing in it, well, that's incredibly unjust. And to claim that such a god is just is that's literally a contradiction in terms. Those are opposites. That's a logical impossibility. Third, the primary use of hell doctrine is to scare people into doing what you want them to. Take, for example, this blog post from Albert Mohler, minister and president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. About a decade ago, this other pastor named Rob Bell wrote a book that challenged the traditional notions of eternal torment. And he taught annihilationism, which is the idea that when you die, you're just dead. It's just, you're no longer conscious. And he was promptly canceled by most of the evangelical community. Anyway, so Moeller is wringing his hands over this liberal view of hell for several reasons, but the relevant one today is this. Quote, as it turns out, theological liberalism is not only a rejection of biblical Christianity, it is a failed attempt to rescue the church from its doctrines. At the end of the day, a secular society feels no need to attend or support secularized churches with a secularized theology. Well, Mr. Moeller blames this weak tea hell teaching for the fact that attendance in mainstream churches has fallen off so much in the past century. After all, how will you get butts in the pews and tithes in the offering plate if you can't threaten anybody with consequences for not doing so, right? If you tell everyone they're saved and they'll go to the good place if they're just good people, why would anyone go to your church except for be in a social club? The link to this blog post is in the description below. Give it a read. It'll blow your mind how angry this man is that his religion is becoming less shitty. Well, fourth and last, I think it is child abuse to teach children about hell. Do you know how many humans have nightmares from this stuff? And there's no good reason for that. People are deeply traumatized by stuff that exists only in our imagination. I don't think it's okay to terrorize children, and that's certainly not a substitute for parenting skills, Braxton.
What do you think is the most dangerous or problematic issue that theologically conservative Christians hold to? And I'm talking about an issue or a position, not a person, a movement, or a party.
Well, I would say that the most dangerous thing is theocracy. We're watching this play out in America right now, where millions of fundies seem to think that their unsubstantiated beliefs belong in the laws. And this is impacting everything from education to healthcare to business to justice to speech, and not in a good way. We have religious conservatives all the way up to the Supreme Court who are standing up for that fundamental right of Christians to discriminate against gay people. They're trying to keep any mention of non-heterosexuality out of schools, thereby erasing entire classes of people. We have them denying sex education to kids, denying birth control, denying abortion. We have them forcing religion into public schools and events. Well, I could go on with this list for a while, but suffice to say, theocracy is a sure way to create a shithole country. Look around the planet, Braxton, and read some history books and tell me if there's any theocracies you want to live in. Conservative Christianity, this is an enemy of a free society and a free humanity. Well, Braxton, this has just been delightful. I hope you enjoy these answers, and I'd be keen to see any responses from you. Have a lovely and unblessed day in our material universe. Well, that's all for today, folks. I'll be back with some more whoopings in a week. Por favor, smash those like and subscribe buttons below. Leave some feedback. Tell your friends about the show. Stay warm. And thanks so much for watching again. Peace.